Final cuts will be made soon, so I am offering my final Buffalo Bills 53-man roster projection today on Locked On Bills.
You are Locked On Bills, your daily Buffalo Bills podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Bills Mafia? It's Joe Marino, author of Go Bills and Buffalo's Run, also the co-host of the Locked On NFL Scouting Podcast, and I'm your host of Locked On Bills. Want to thank you for making Locked On Bills your first listen every day, and a big welcome and shout out to our everydayers. You know who you are. Those of you who never miss a single episode, we appreciate y'all being here very, very much. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Well, folks, the preseason is in the books, and I told you we had a lot to get to here in the aftermath of the preseason ending, and so some of these episodes are going to come quick. And I just have a lot to cover before the Bills get to their final cuts. And so this is just kind of part of that. I know that I just posted my post-game reaction, my top takeaways from the Bills win over the Bears. And we very quickly are turning around into a 53-man roster projection. And so I've got that lined up for you today. I have some things that even surprised myself that I put down on this. And so it's going to be a very interesting next couple of days as Brandon Beane and Sean McDermott work through this roster. Now, let's get through a couple of notes here that are important for everyone to be aware of as the Bills are about to make these cuts, and cuts are going to be coming in fast and furious across the entire NFL. And so the Bills and all of the teams in the league have to bring their roster down to 53 players by 4 p.m. Eastern time on Tuesday, August 29th. And right now, the Bills roster is at 90 players like most in the league. So there's a lot of cuts coming. And then from there, you start to see this roster trim down happen. And then there are players that are subject to waivers. Players that are subject to waivers are players that have less than 4 years in the NFL. If they're a player that has less than 4 years in the NFL, they are subject to waivers and they can be claimed by another team. Okay, so you can have a situation where you cut a player that has less than 4 years of NFL experience and another team can claim them and sign them to their active roster. Okay, only their active roster, not their practice squad. And that waiver claim priority is the draft order from the 2023 NFL draft. And so a lot of hurdles to get through there if you cut some young players. Now, if a player has more than 4 years of NFL experience, they are not subject to waivers. They become a free agent immediately. And so that will apply differently to different guys on the roster. Now, one of the big things that we always talk about with the Bills cutting players that are young that you'd like to get back in your practice squad is the likelihood that some team will sign them. And I think the Bills are going to cut some young players. I think Nick Broker, a draft pick, Alex Austin, a draft pick. These guys are probably going to get cut, and you want to get them back on your practice squad. Those players are subject to waivers. The veterans, guys like Dean Marlowe, A.J. Klein, Shaq Lawson, those types of guys are not subject to waivers. But we always get nervous about other teams claiming guys that you want the Bills to get back on the practice squad. And so my buddy Greg Thompson from Cover One, he has put together the data that I want to share with you. The Bills since 2018 have cut 222 players. 13 of them were claimed. And I'm talking about in the cut down right before final cuts. So 13 of 222 were claimed by other teams. That's 5.8%. A reminder as to those names. In 2018, Ike Bucker, Adam Redmond, Kalen Clay, Tanner Vallejo. 2019, Ray McLeod, Ryan Lewis, Deion Lacey. 2020, Vincent Taylor. 2021, Nick McLeod. 2022, Nick McLeod again, Luke Tenuta, Tanner Owen, and Kingsley Jonathan. And so we'll see what this year has in store. But there's always that healthy fear of guys not being able to clear waivers and get back to you when in reality, a lot of these guys do. They do get back to you. And so that's something to be mindful of. Now, also, as you see players already starting to get cut throughout the NFL, these players can't be claimed until 4 p.m. Eastern time, or until 12 p.m. Eastern time on Wednesday. So you have the deadline to have everyone cut by 4 p.m. on Tuesday, and then the waiver claims end at 12 p.m. noon on Wednesday. And so really your final roster won't really be set until Wednesday. And then I use the air quotes for the words final roster because, let's face it, there's going to be fluidity with the roster all season long. And so that's your first initial look at the 53, but it's going to change quite a bit as the season moves along. So just always keep that in mind. Also, I want to mention roster gymnastics because of all of these rules like waivers, like if you put a guy on injured reserve before the season, they're out for the entire year. But if they get on the initial 53-man roster, they can be put on injured reserve and then called back later. You're going to see Brandon Beane do some things like he does every year that are what I like to call roster gymnastics, where they might keep a guy on the 53-man roster that's just going to go on injured reserve, and they're going to cut a player that's going to be signed the next day. He's done this literally every single year. So if they cut somebody like Blake Ferguson, be mindful of that's just roster gymnastics. He's going to sit in the parking lot until 12 o'clock on Wednesday. The Bills are going to put somebody on injured reserve, and they're going to sign him back. And I'm going to project that to happen for at least one player here as I get into my 53-man roster projection. So just be mindful of that. Don't overreact to these initial cuts. It happens every year. I say don't overreact, and I still see a lot of overreaction out there. You have to let the waiver claims play out. You have to let the Bills make their corresponding moves, which could be mean putting someone on injured reserve and then signing a veteran that you trust back that you cut within a very short period of time. So just keep your head on a swivel and be mindful of that as we navigate through this over the next few days. All right, with all that out of the way, let's get into my 53-man roster projection. Let's start with quarterback. I have the Bills keeping two quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Kyle Allen as QB2. We'll see what happens with Matt Barkley. I'm nervous about the elbow injury, folks. And it's not that we're counting on Matt Barkley to play meaningful football, but he is likely going to be on the practice squad. And you have to have a third guy, not only for running scout team, but you also want to have that emergency quarterback 3. We know that the Bills were interested in trading for Trey Lance. We've seen some other quarterback movement. Josh Dobbs was traded. I'm keeping a big eye on Mason Rudolph. Could the Bills make a trade for Case Keenum, right? That's an interesting name. The Texans have C.J. Stroud. They also have Davis Mills. Would they like to part with Case Keenum? Does Case Keenum want to just finish his career in Houston, kind of his hometown situation? I'm not sure, but I expect the Bills to have another quarterback signed at some point that's going to be on the practice squad. So for now, Josh Allen, Kyle Allen on the roster. I'm nervous about Matt Barkley and his health in his elbow. We'll see what happens with bringing in another quarterback, but I would expect that. So 2 quarterbacks. I have 4 running backs, including Reggie Gilliam. So Reggie Gilliam at fullback, James Cook, Latavius Murray, Damien Harris. I think those guys make the roster. The guys that are cut, Ty Johnson, Darrington Evans, Jordan Mims. I'm sure the Bills would love to get Ty Johnson and Darrington Evans back on the practice squad. But I think if that was any different, I'd be surprised. I think Damien Harris was the guy that I was concerned about based on his knee soreness, based on kind of the way things ended in New England with availability issues, with him having a very small market coming out of his contract in New England, despite being a good player, but him being back healthy, playing with the starters, right? He spelled James Cook there and vultured that touchdown in the drive against the Bears, the opening drive for the Bills offense. I think that was a clear signal to us that Damien Harris is going to be a big part of this plan. So I have Damien Harris making this roster. At wide receiver, this is a spot where you could see some gymnastics, if you will. I think your very straightforward conversation is Stephon Diggs, Gabe Davis, Trent Sherfield, Deontay Hardy. I think those 4 guys make it. I think they roster 6. I think Khalil Shakir makes it. And then I think it comes down to like Justin Shorter versus Andy Isabella for that last spot. I have the Bills keeping Justin Shorter, Andy Isabella being released. And so my thought process there is Justin Shorter is a rookie, 5th-round pick, cost control player for 4 years, brings size that doesn't really exist elsewhere in this Bills wide receiver core. I think he's got a ways to go to become more consistent, even as a special teams player. But we've seen the Bills like having this player, whether in the past it's been a Jake Kumaro or a Duke Williams. You want to have at least one size guy that brings physicality, that has some vertical ability, and, of course, translates to special teams. I think Justin Shorter is their guy for that. Andy Isabella, he's a likable player. But, what I keep going back to with him is the NFL has not been knocking down his door for him to be on the team, right? He was in Arizona as a second-round pick, was released, had a cup of coffee with the Ravens last year, and he signed with the Bills right before camp. If the NFL was lining up and wanted to have Andy Isabella, they'd have brought him onto their team at some point sooner than when the Bills have. And so I think the Bills have a reasonable shot to get him back on their practice squad. He's not subject to waivers. And so he's a guy that can make his own choice. He can't be just claimed by some other team. He's going to be cut and become a free agent. And so he can make his choice of signing to another 53 or signing to a practice squad, including the Bills. And so I think the Bills have a reasonable shot there to get him back. So the 6 that make it: Diggs, Davis, Sherfield, Deontay Hardy, Khalil Shakir, Justin Shorter. Your guys that are released: Andy Isabella, Brian Thompson, Tyrell Shavers, Desmond Patton, Keyshawn Johnson, Marcel Aitman, Isaiah Coulter. I'm sure the Bills would like to get 2 or 3 of those receivers back to their practice squad. But for now, I have Shorter making it over Andy Isabella. All right, folks, August is here, and you know what that means: the official start of fantasy football drafting month. Get championship ready for your home league by trying out Best Ball on Underdog Fantasy. Underdog is the easiest place to play fantasy football and the best place for best ball. All you do is one live snake draft. There's no waivers, no trades, and then Underdog sets your best lineup for you each week. So try it out now with Underdog's Best Ball Mania Tournament, which is the largest fantasy football contest of all time. It's back again this year and even bigger, with $15 million of total prizes up for grabs, including an absurd $3 million going to the winner. And folks, last year the winner drafted their team in July, so there is simply no reason for you to wait around. Visit underdog.com, underdogfantasy.com, or find them in the App Store and sign up with promo code LOCKEDON, and that'll get you your first deposit doubled up to $100. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code LOCKEDON. Bills Mafia, let's get personal for a minute. Has anyone ever been caught skinny dipping? You know what I mean. When you dip your tortilla chip just barely enough to get a dab of salsa on it, it's okay. We've all been there. And sometimes it's not your fault. Most tortilla chips can't even handle a chunky dip without breaking right in half, but those days are over. It's time to say goodbye to skinny dipping and hello to chunky dunking, because Zach's Mighty tortilla chips are literally made to dip. They're strong and sturdy enough to handle the heftiest dips of guac, all 7 layers of dip, and every last chunk in that salsa. So say goodbye to skinny dipping and hello to chunky dunking with Zach's Mighty tortilla chips. Available at Wegmans in the chip aisle. Zach's Mighty tortilla chips, equipped to dip. All right, let's move on to the tight end position. I think this is very straightforward. The Bills rostered 3 of them: Dalton Kincaid, Dawson Knox, Quentin Morris, and then Jace Sternberger and Joel Wilson are cut. I'm sure they'll like to have at least one of them back on their practice squad. For offensive line, this is where things got tough for me. This is a tough spot. I think the Bills will keep at least 9 offensive linemen. I think your very straightforward part of the conversation: Mitch Morse, Connor McGovern, Osiris Torrance, Spencer Brown, Deion Dawkins, Ryan Bates, David Edwards. The first 7, not hard at all to get there. It's the last 2 where things get difficult. I think Ryan Van Demark is one of those last 2. And then you have a conversation between David Quessenberry, who's veteran in the league, has been with the team for a year and a half now, and Alec Anderson. Alec Anderson, a UDFA out of UCLA. The Bills have played him at a ton of different spots: guard, center, tackle. He played right tackle, was the first right tackle in for Spencer Brown against the Bears. And I have the Bills keeping Alec Anderson over David Quessenberry. And I have concern that I'm going to be wrong about this, but my process is pretty straightforward. Versatility. Alec Anderson can play a bunch of different spots, including center. And I think he's kind of a Ryan Bates in the making, if you will. And the fact that he showed that he could function a little bit at tackle, I know that he didn't play great. He got dusted by Trevis Gibson on that sack, the strip sack for for Kyle Allen. But I think that position flexibility is going to be important. I don't think they can get him back on their practice squad. And so for that reason, I think he makes it. Whereas I think David Questenberry, there's a decent chance that they could get him back on their practice squad. And so two very young offensive tackles, backup offensive tackles for the Bills. But I think both have shown enough in this preseason that they're worth hanging on to, that they're probably not going to get back on the practice squad. There's versatility with Alec Anderson. There's incredible size and athleticism and growth from Ryan Vandemark. And I think that's a fairly reasonable chance that that's your backup offensive tackles. Is it concerning? Yeah, there's no experience at all between those two players. But I think getting a David Questenberry back on the practice squad, maybe, looking at a Bobby Hart, I don't think he's going to make the Lions. Getting him back on your practice squad, something like that will happen. And so it's a little bit of a bold prediction, but I just see a world where Alec Anderson makes this roster and David Questenberry, I mean, he just continues to struggle. I don't think he played poorly against the Bears, at least when watching it live, but we've seen him enough in practice. I saw him enough in games last year that what's the point? What's the point in holding on to the guy with experience if he can't play? Let's lean into the younger player that has versatility, that there's just more upside now and in the future. So Vandemark and Alec Anderson, the last two offensive linemen after Morse, McGovern, Torrance, Spencer Brown, Deion Dawkins, Ryan Bates, and David Edwards. Other offensive linemen that will be cut: David Questenberry, as I mentioned, Nick Broker, Richard Garage, Ike Bucker, Kevin Jarvis, Greg Manns, Garrett McGinn. I think the Bills will get several of them back on their practice squad. Let's move over to the defensive end position. This is something that I have wrestled with quite a bit. And even this is going to be different than what I told you last night on the podcast. I think the Bills keep 5 defensive ends. I think Von Miller starts the year on the PUP list, and so he'll be unavailable for the first few weeks of the season, but I think he comes back, obviously. But I think the Bills start with 5 defensive ends: Greg Rousseau, Leonard Floyd, A.J. Epinesa, Boogie Basham, and Shaq Lawson. I think all 5 wind up making this roster. Shaq Lawson could be a roster gymnastics guy. I could see the Bills cutting him, then getting somebody back on injured reserve, and then re-signing Shaq Lawson. So keep your head on a swivel if he's cut initially. Would not be surprised if he comes right back. But I think they're going to want to keep 5 on the active roster, especially with Von Miller out. And then your guys that are cut there are Kingsley Jonathan and Cameron Klein. I know the Bills would love to get both of them back on the practice squad if they can. Kingsley Jonathan was signed last year during these cuts, so there's a possibility that happens again. But we'll see. I think both of those guys might get claimed, but I know the Bills would love to get both of them back on their practice squad. So I have them keeping 5 defensive ends. Again, keep your head on a swivel there with Shaq Lawson. A defensive tackle, I have the Bills keeping 5 of them as well: Daquan Jones, Ed Oliver, Poona Ford, Tim Settle, Jordan Phillips. I think those guys all make it. And then Elianku, Cortez Broughton, Kendall Vickers, DJ Dale are released. And I think you will see, a couple of those defensive tackles back on the practice squad. And, Elianku, Broughton, Vickers, those guys are all intriguing enough players that you feel good about maybe being 7 deep at defensive tackle, which is a good place to be in terms of your overall depth. So 10 overall defensive linemen, I think, is the way to go when projecting this Bills roster at this point in time. All right, we got to talk back 7 on defense and special teams here in just a moment. But first, maybe you want to go to a Bills game this year and you're stressed about buying tickets. Well, the unfortunate reality is that sometimes buying tickets to your favorite events is stressful, but it really shouldn't be. Thanks to Gametime, we don't have to have that stress anymore, folks. It is the fast and easiest way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. They have killer deals on last-minute tickets. They have a best price guarantee, so you can stop stressing over getting tickets and start getting excited for the fun you're going to have. The Gametime app is awesome. They have flash deals, last-minute tickets. They give you images of the seats so you can see what the view is when you get there. Great prices, and the app is really, really easy to navigate. They also send those tickets right to your phone, so you never have to dig through emails to find them. Super great app. It's the peak of ticket buying experience. Trust me on this. Snag the tickets without the stress with Gametime. In fact, download the Gametime app, create an account, use our promo code LOCKEDONNFL. That'll get you $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last-minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, folks, welcome back. We got the back seven to get to here in this last segment. I also would like to take a moment here and invite you to join the Locked On Bills subtext community. It has been so fun. We started it several months ago, and with the season here, it's really getting fun. I have been sending out live analysis to the subtext subscribers during the preseason games. People have loved that, just my real authentic thoughts as they come. So that's really cool. You also get one-on-one text conversations. So love talking Bills football with you guys throughout the week. Only a text message away, direct line right to me. So check it out. There's a link to join in today's show notes. There's a link to join every day in the show notes. Doesn't matter what episode you click on. If you're on YouTube, wherever you're listening to podcasts, check out the show notes for a link to join the Locked On Bills subtext community. I give my first reaction to all Bills news, all major Bills news. I send it out to them first. And send you pretty much at least a text every day just with my general thoughts on what's going on with the team. So check it out. Would love for you to be part of the Locked On Bills subtext community. All right, back seven on defense. Let's do it. Linebacker, this is a tough one. This is a tough one for me. Here's what I have. Terrell Bernard, Tyrel Dodson, Dorian Williams, Matt Milano, Tyler Medikevich, Baylon Spector making the team. That means A.J. Klein, Traven Howard, and Deshaun White are cut. Now, here's the thing about Baylon Spector. I think he makes the initial team and then is placed on injured reserve. He's got that hamstring injury, but I think they're going to want to try to control him a little bit. And so I would expect some veteran that has at least 4 years of experience to get cut, wait in the parking lot, let the deadline pass for waivers, put Baylon Spector on injured reserve, and then bring that guy back. Maybe that's Blake Ferguson. Maybe that's Shaq Lawson. Something like that. Maybe that's you can think of a lot of different players that could apply to that. All right. So I think there's going to be some gymnastics here at linebacker. It's a tough situation. We know that. I don't know if there's a move that's coming. It was hard for me to waive A.J. Klein, but I feel like we have to remember Terrell Bernard is still part of this conversation. And is there much of a difference between A.J. Klein and Tyrel Dodson? I don't think so. I think A.J. Klein is easy to get back on the practice squad. I don't think you'll have any trouble at all getting him back on the practice squad. So you might as well stash him there. If you need him, you call him up. You know, Brandon Beane, when they initially signed A.J. Klein, it was not to be a starter. It was to be an asset to the room as a veteran. He can do that from the practice squad. And if it comes down to it and he has to wind up starting, they can easily, bring him up on the active roster and make that work. But because there's really no threat to lose him, I think the best place for him is the practice squad. You put Baylon Spector on injured reserve, and then you're technically your five linebackers would be Bernard, Dotson, Dorian Williams, Matt Milano, Tyler Medikevich, with having A.J. Klein on your practice squad. That means also Traven Howard, Deshaun White, not on this roster. I'm sure they'd like to maybe get Traven Howard back on the practice squad as well. At corner, I have the Bills keeping, I guess, five. It's the classification for Cam Lewis that keeps throwing me off. So let's put Cam Lewis at safety. And then keeping five corners: Trey White, Dane Jackson, Christian Benford, Taron Johnson, Kyer Elam, Siran Neal. Excuse me, that is still six corners. Trey White, Dane Jackson, Christian Benford, Kyer Elam, Taron Johnson, Siran Neal. I think all of those guys make the team. That means Alex Austin, Kyron Brown, Jamarcus Ingram, all released. I know they'd love to get all of them back on the practice squad, especially Jamarcus Ingram. And I'm sure Alex Austin, who the Bills drafted. Even Kyron Brown's an interesting player. He was on that opening kickoff team against the Bears on Saturday. And so, I'm sure that's an indicator that there's something that they like about him as well. So good cornerback situation overall. I think six make it to start. You have a healthy practice squad as well. The Bills are pretty loaded at the cornerback position, even if that guy, Kyer Elam, who we'd like to be the starter, isn't going to be the starter, and I don't think he deserves to be the starter. So there's all that. And then at safety, you have the Bills keeping five of those as well. So 10 total or 11 total defensive backs. Cam Lewis, I'm classifying as a safety. So Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Taylor Rapp, Damar Hamlin, Cam Lewis making this roster at safety, with Dean Marlowe, Zane Anderson, and Jared Maiden being cut. I think Dean Marlowe is perfect practice squad guy in a lot of ways, just like A.J. Klein, but for the safeties, I think that's where you keep him. I don't think he's going to go to some other team. I mean, he flirted around with the Lions and the Falcons and really didn't get the opportunity he was looking for. I think him sticking around with the Bills, collecting paychecks on the practice squad, being a call up away from being on the active roster is the exact perfect spot for him to be. And then you get to specialists, Reed Ferguson, Tyler Bass, Sam Martin. There's nothing to be even discussed there. There's no competition for those players. There's nobody to cut. Those will be your specialists. So that's how I have it, folks. I know I gave you 54 players, but remember, the caveat here is Baylon Spector goes to the injured reserve, and then somebody gets cut and signed right back, whether that's Shaq Lawson or there's plenty of options. Reed Ferguson certainly comes to mind as an option for that as well. And so there you have it. We'll see how I do. Stuff is always hard to predict. It never goes exactly how you think it's going to. And so we'll obviously be eagerly anticipating what happens here, and we'll have a lot to react to once it all does. So that is certainly coming your way very, very soon once these cuts are finalized. We have a lot to do. I said it yesterday, but it's nice to get this 53-man projection done, but I still want to do an all-22 review from the Bears game. I want to get herd mentality in. We have to react to the final cuts. I have to give you my stat pod. I haven't done that yet. I got to give you my projected Bill stats for the offensive players. And so that's coming pretty soon. I have at least one guest lined up, maybe a player. We'll see. I have a meeting about that middle of next week about this player and their representation getting in on the podcast. It would be one that I'd love to talk to. So we'll see how that goes. We got to get ready for the Jets. So we are in season. It's going to be busy here on the podcast. Make sure that you are subscribed. We'd love it if you took a second to rate, review, and share the podcast. This is going to be our best season yet here on Locked On Bills. I'm really expanding how we're going to cover this team during the season. Been doing this for a number of years now. I started in January of 2019. There's some things during the week that I've always wanted to get to during the season that I'm going to get to, even if it means we record more episodes. So it's going to be a big time year here for us on Locked On Bills. Would love for you to join me for the ride by making sure that you subscribe, rate, review, share the podcast. Really appreciate that. Really appreciate you being here. Have a great rest of your day. Go Bills, and I look forward to catching up with you again really soon.